This is the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And Halenda's, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortinos, and Foodland locations. Halenda's, the way sausage should taste. And now, here's Ted.
50 years ago, Canadians gathered en masse to witness what would become the most watched sporting events in this nation's history. That was the Canada-Soviet Hockey Series. Summit 72 is a 4-part documentary which airs on CBC Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. And joining me now, the hero of Summit 72, the man responsible not only for the game winner in Game 8, but also Game 6 and 7. Paul Henderson. Let's go back here, because this was just a remarkable achievement for you and for Team Canada. The whole thing is just like you couldn't have scripted a movie like this that any studio would have purchased, because they wouldn't have bought it. They would have thought this is not possible. But we go back 50 years ago. Initially, you were reluctant to join Team Canada. Why?
Well, I didn't know. Well, there was a lot of things, but really when we thought about it, that didn't last very long. I just didn't want to give up my summer, but then it finally dawned on me, I can represent Canada. And then the other side of the coin is that, gosh, I'm going to be able to, these guys that I have to play against, we'll get to know a lot of them in a better way. And so it didn't take long for me to change my attitude toward that.
Yeah. At that point, what were your personal thoughts about the series, both from a sports perspective and from a political perspective? Because here we are, they're saying it's the pros versus the amateurs, which we know is not true, but it's communism versus capitalism at the same time.
Well, and I was really tired of them winning at the Olympics and saying they had the best hockey players. And so let's play the big boys and see how you do well then.
Yeah.
But in truthfulness, if they'd have played it during the season, I wouldn't have been chosen. But you see, we had to have a training camp. And so we needed 35 people to have a training camp.
Mm-hmm.
And Clark and Ellis and I were put together, Bobby Clark, Ronnie Ellis. Well, I knew Ronnie Ellis and I would be playing together, and just who would be the center iceman. And we went to the first practice and they gave us Clarkie, and there was 7 lines, 7 center icemen, 7 left wingers, 7 right wingers. And we knew we were going to have to play ourselves onto the team. And everybody was going to get to play a game or 2 maybe. But my dad died in 1968, and I was going to bring my mother down. And so I said to Ronnie and Clarkie, let's work our buns up. I would really like to play in Toronto. And of course, Ronnie Ellis wanted to play here also, because you're both Maple Leafs. And we didn't know Clarkie very well, but you didn't have to motivate him anyway. And so fortunately for us, we were underdogs. And so we went to training camp and we really took it serious. We really worked hard out there. And then we had a red-white game, and our side won 5-3. I scored 2 goals and Clarkie got 1. And after a while, it became evident that we were one of the better lines, maybe even the best line in camp. And so we got to the point we really knew we would play in Montreal, and then we found out how good those Russians were.
Yeah,
it was a wake-up call.
You were quoted at one point as saying, and this is the exact quote, "I want to prove that I can play with these guys." Were you not confident in your abilities at that point?
Yeah, but of course I was confident. I knew I was a good hockey player. I scored 38 goals, but we had 12 Hall of Famers on this team.
Yeah.
So, when you look at the line, you had the best line in hockey, the Hatfield, Rattel, and Gilbert, and then you come back with Esposito, Cornway, and Mahovlich, and you got Perreault and Martin. I mean, you were going to have to do something special to prove you could play with these guys, and then even make the team. And as it turned out very well for all three of us, Clark, Ellis, and myself.
Did you realize, or did you think that when you first showed up at training camp, that not necessarily you personally, but the team itself was not in shape? They were not ready for this.
Well, we usually went to camp and we got into shape at training camp.
Yeah.
And I mean, we knew the Russians were good, but like look at the NHL today. If the Toronto Maple Leafs play a team near the bottom, they're going to generally, if they play a series with them, they're going to probably beat them. And so I figured if our goaltenders had a bad game and their goaltenders had a great game, we might tie or lose a game. But just like I said, we had I figured that we would overwhelm them. I really did. Because if you take that team and play it against any other NHL team, the team's going to win.
Yeah. So you go to Montreal, and we should point out that at that point you get paid $200 a week for training camp for 2 weeks for 2 weeks at $200 a week, and $100 per game. Now, $200 a week in today's money is equivalent to about $1,500. I don't know whether you could get an NHL player for $1,500 to come for a card signing today.
No chance of that.
No,
but,
exactly.
Honestly, I never thought about the money. And I don't think any of us did.
Mm.
It was all about representing. When you really thought about it, you're going to represent your country. And I believe we live in the best country in the world. And so once I got there, gosh, and it was just such a great, you send out there with the Maple Leaf on you. Every person that's ever played for Team Canada, they would say one of the greatest thrills in their life.
So you get to Montreal, and in Montreal, it's hot. It's like 93 degrees game time. And inside the Forum, I realize it's air conditioned to a certain degree, but it must have been really hot on the ice.
Well, it was hot, but they were hotter. We got off. Phil scored right off the bat, first shift. And then at the 6-minute mark, I scored to make it 2-0. And Clark, Ellis, and I come back to the bench, and they remember me saying this. I looked at them and I said, this is going to be a very long series. We knew in the first 6 minutes, the way they passed the puck, and they broke it. They come up the ice. They didn't like what they looked at, so they turned back. We played for Punch Imlach. He even hated a drop pass. You never, ever went backwards. You always went forward. And so I felt sorry for Dryden. I think every time he thought they were going to shoot, they passed the thing. And every time he thought they were going to pass, they shot it.
Yeah.
And so it was a learning experience like crazy. But the worst thing that Cinda did, he only dressed 5 defensemen. And by the third period, their legs were like cement.
Yeah.
And it was because of the heat and everything. But also, Ted, when we were in the dressing room, we're like a bunch of caged lions. We wanted to get out there and we just wanted to show these guys who they were. And you remember Esposito took the face off. He was so serious about that, he put the puck right back into our own end. You drop the puck and you let the person get it. But Phil, I'm not losing this thing. And that's the way we felt. But obviously, by the third period, especially for our defensemen, they just came at us on waves. But but it ended up making for a great series, especially for Paul Henderson.
Yeah, well, and you lose game 1, 7-3. The world is shocked, literally thinking, what just happened in Montreal? You come to Toronto for game 4, you turn things around, you beat the Soviets 4-2 or 4-1, I should say. And now things are looking a little bit better until you go into Winnipeg. All you can manage in Winnipeg is a tie. You score goal number 2 in the series, personally, an achievement. But all you get out of the deal was a tie. And then comes Vancouver, game 4, and you lose 5-3 to the Soviets. And now the crowd is turning on Team Canada. What did that make you feel like?
Well, it didn't feel very, very good, but I understood their frustration. And we took Billy Goldsworthy took 2 penalties right at the start of the game, and they scored 2 power play goals, and we're down 2-0 right off the bat. And then we couldn't sit back. We had to get up. We had to try to score goals. And And for some reason, some games you just don't have it. And we didn't play well as a team. And I think our line even, we didn't have many scoring chances ourselves. And I can understand the fans, they came to cheer us on and they, but as a player, you're sitting there, God, I gave up my summer. I'm doing the best I can. And then, of course, Phil comes out, Phil Esposito, I think in 1972 was the best forward in all of hockey. And we had 4 captains on that team, but the leader on and off the ice was Esposito. I mean, and that Johnny Esau, he just let him go. And he's out there and he's the Italian, they're sweating, and I'm disappointed, and just,
Yeah.
And that's when the people in Canada opened, oh my gracious, we got to get behind these guys. And I would say to you, Ted, that if we had 3,000 Canadians come over there, and without them, I don't think we could have won that game, this series. And I'll tell you what, we lost the first game, as you know.
Yeah.
And they played the anthem, and we had to skate off the ice and we had to go by the Canadian fans at that end of the ice. They stood up and gave us an incredible standing ovation. And it was a miserable night in Moscow. And an hour later, we get back to the hotel room, and there was hundreds of them outside our hotel room. And we get off the bus and they went crazy again. Oh, Canada. I mean, the fact that most of them were hammered has got nothing to do with it. They sang the Canadian national anthem before the last 3 games with as much passion and fervor as it's ever been sung before. I'm standing on the blue line, and my hairs on my arm are going up. That's how, and like it just picked us up like crazy. And we can't let these people down.
Game 5, which is game 1 in the first game in the Soviet Union in Moscow, you suffer a concussion. The doctor is saying you shouldn't be playing anymore, and you're basically begging Harry Sinden, saying, "Look, you got to let me in this game."
That's exactly what happened. Jim Murray was the doctor, and he examined me, and he said, "Paul, you got a concussion. You got to take your equipment off." And so went out and told Harry, and Harry came in and says, "Paul, you've got to take your equipment off." And I said, "Harry, don't do this to me. Please, please, please. Let me sit here. I got a pounding headache right now, but I'll take care of myself, but please let me play." And he looked at me and you know what he said? He said, "Paul, we sure as hell need you. And if you want to play, I am not going to stop you."
Yeah.
I tell people that's why I'm not that bright anymore. But today I'd have never been let back out on the ice. And so it took me about 10 minutes to sort of, they gave me some whatever they get, aspirins or whatever it was. And went back out. And actually I scored 2 goals in that game. I'd scored 1 earlier, and then I got a breakaway and blew it past them.
You got 2 goals and an assist in that game. That's a pretty good night. You go to game 6, the second game in the Soviet Union, and you win it. Canada finally comes back, and now things are starting to look like the way they should. And for people who don't realize, everybody thinks Paul Henderson is the guy who scored the winning goal in game 8. Paul Henderson scored the winning goal in game 6, game 7, and game 8. I don't know if everybody knows that, but for those who don't, they're probably shocked right now to hear that. That is quite an amazing thing. You scored the winning goal in game 6. What was your recollection of that now as you look back?
Well, it actually happened in the second period. We were on the ice, and I intercepted a pass. Their defenseman tried to throw it across the ice, and I intercepted it, and it was a 1-on-2. And I got over the blue line, and I tried to use the defenseman as a screen, and which really worked out well. And I very seldom ever did a slap shot because I was right-handed and I played left wing. And I'd only take it back about 3 feet and just snap it the way a lot of people do today.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's what I decided to do. And I don't think Tretiak saw it before he went by. I tried to put it right along the ice, just inside his left post, and hit the inside of the post and went in. And so we win that game. But the best goal I ever scored in my life, there was about 2 minutes left in the game 7.
Yeah.
And Savard hit me with a pass just up below just before the blue line, and I turned, and there was 2 defensemen back and 2 forwards. And I went in and tried to make a move on him and got around him. And just as I was going to shoot it, he cut me down, the defenseman. But it really helped me, and I put it right under the bar on Tretiak. And that was like, Perot would go through the whole team and score a goal, or maybe Cornway. But I wasn't that great a stick handler and that kind of stuff. And so that may be the only time I ever beat 1-on-4. But I said to my wife after the game, Nora, I can die a happy man, because I probably will never score a bigger goal in my life. If I don't score that goal, the series is all over. 2 days later, I score a garbage goal, and no one remembers the one I thought was going to be the best goal of my life.
I know, and I find that so funny when because I've heard you say that, refer to it before as a garbage goal, and I'm thinking, bring on the garbage if that's a garbage goal. But your goal in Game 7 really was quite a beautiful thing. If people get an opportunity to see this 4-part series on CBC called Summit 72, which is extremely well done, you'll see the beauty of Paul Henderson's goal. So was it Game 7 or Game 8 when Bobby Clark took Harlem out with a wicked slash across the ankle?
I think it was it was Game 7. Definitely. He come back and played for a little while in Game 8. Or maybe it might have been Game 6 even. Yeah. I can't remember. I don't.
You did not like that at all. You were not happy with that move on Clark's part.
It's not so much. See, I was talking to how this all come out. That's the way Bobby Clark played all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, you played against him, and that's the way he played the game. And I was talking to this reporter, and we was talking about my grandsons, and they're playing hockey. I had 2 grandsons playing hockey. And he said, and for some, we were talking about sportsmanship and that, and my grandsons. And so he asked me what I felt about that. And I said, well, when I talk to my grandsons, that's not a part of sportsmanship, but that's the way Bobby Clark played the game. And so the guy, but he never talked about this. He just said, well, Henderson, while I was talking about my grandson in terms of sportsmanship, it wasn't, but there's a lot of guys that are not sportsmen when they play. And Clark wouldn't be in the NHL if he didn't play with that. So it got blown right out of perspective.
Right. And when you see him today and when you see him since then, how are your feelings toward each other?
Well, I talked to him about it. I told him, Bob and I are fine, but everybody makes a big, that's unfortunately, so many times the press, they want to bring up garbage. It just drives me crazy. And if you don't keep it in context, it gets blown out of shape. And this guy didn't put it in context one iota.
Yeah, for sure.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
Well, fall's coming, the kids are back in school, and many of us are easing back into the office at least some of the time. But it is time to get back to work. Time to ditch the sweatpants, T-shirts, and put on some real work clothes. Dress for success. And we've got you covered from business casual to sports jackets to suits. Virtually everything to look your professional best. The Tom's Place Back to Work sale features new fall fashion arrivals like 100% wool suits starting at just $199 each. Sports jackets at 50% off. A crazy selection of sports and dress shirts for $66 each. And lips and dress shirts regularly $145, now only $66. Everything is on sale. Tom's Place is open daily, 11 to 6 weekdays, 10 to 5 Saturday, and 12 to 5 Sunday. Visit Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin in Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted and his guest.
Paul Henderson is my special guest this week. We go to move on to game 8. You're losing after 2 periods, down 5-3. I remember watching it and thinking, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing that could ever happen." Suddenly, the team picks things up. Cournoyer ties it up, but the goal light doesn't go on. And now it's like, oh, scam, conspiracy theory. What's going on here? How come it's not an official tie yet? And then through some arguing, eventually they gave you a goal. They gave you a goal, and Canada ties it at that point.
Well, exactly. And that's why Eagleson got into trouble.
Yeah.
Apparently, the guy that was the goal judge was somebody that had defected over there. I had no idea who it was. And so Eagleson wanted to get rid of him. And he come down. And of course, by this time, the Red Army, because of all the FAMs, they brought the Red Army in to try to control them. And they grabbed Eagleson. He come down to try to complain about this. And then Peter Mahovlich, I didn't even know what was going on. When I looked up, Peter Mahovlich was over there whacking a guy with his stick and trying to get a hold of Eagleson. And then we all ended up going over there, but that's what happened. Eagleson got upset the light didn't come on. But we were fearful, obviously, when they'd do anything to win. They really would. And well, of course we did too. So.
Well, you can see that tradition in that country of doing anything to win continues to this day with what's going on with their invasion of Ukraine. But that's perhaps another story. So we get toward the end of the third period of the final game. It's a tie game. You get a shot on Tretiak. He stops it. The puck comes back to you, and then you put it in the net for what you call your garbage goal. What went through your mind?
Well, I got to back this up just a little bit.
Okay.
Clark Ellis and I were out on the ice, and we came off with about a minute and a half left in the game. And Sinden sent out Esposito, Cournoyer, and Peter Mahovlich. And then, you talk about a coach's instinct. He came down and he looked at us and he said, if they come off, you guys are up. Okay? And so, we had 3 lines and we didn't anticipate that at all. But I'm sitting there, and we had already heard that the Russians, if the game ended up in a tie, they'd score 1 more goal than we did. And Ted, I did something I never did before in my life. I never did again. I stood up just like that, and I started yelling at Peter Mahovlich. Frank was sitting beside me. He said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I didn't pay any attention to him. And Peter come off, whether he heard me or not, I don't know. But he came off the ice, and I jumped over the boards, and Cournoyer headed at the far side. And I yelled at him on a right-hand shot coming off the side. And I was hoping I could just one-time it. But it was too far out in front of me. And their defenseman come up and tripped me. And I fell into the boards. I was going so far. And I said, I still got time. I went through the whole team. The last time I could do it again. And then I get up and I panicked. I mean, Phil took a shot that just slapped it at Tretiak. And it wasn't a hard shot. And he should never have let the rebound go. And I panicked. Oh my God. And I tried to put it right along the ice. But he got it with his pad, came back to me, and I put it in. But Ted, my dad died in 1968. The puck went over the line, and I had never thought of my dad the whole series. I said out loud, Dad would have loved this one. That fun. There was a touch of Dad would have loved this one. And then, of course, jumped into Cournoyer's times, and that's why he had to have back operations, because I almost broke his back.
1926 of the third period is when you scored. Well, it doesn't leave you a lot of breathing room. 1926, third period.
Shot! Henderson made a wild stab for it and fell. Here's another shot. Right in front. They scored! Henderson has scored for Canada. Henderson right in front of the net. And the fans of the team are going wild.
Yeah, it was. The interesting thing, we come back to the bench. Of course, everybody mobbed me. Of course, we get back to the bench, and Harry said, "You guys finish it off." And I said, Harry, I'm done. I said, Harry, I would be petrified to play the last 34 seconds. I was empty to touch, physically, emotionally, and everything. And he looked at me, he didn't think I was serious. I said, put somebody else out there. And I can't remember who he went out with, Clark and Ellis, but yeah. I didn't play it. I knew that I was done. I was just done. Did
you ever think about grabbing the puck?
Never, ever crossed my mind. It was so sad. We find it. Cornway and I, we did it. That's what we're saying. And so it never entered my mind.
Whatever happened to that puck?
Well, Pat Stapleton, you see it in there, you watch it in there. Pat Stapleton goes and picks it up, and that was his notoriety. Mm-hmm. But back then there was memorabilia and that stuff. But the dumbest thing I ever did, my sweater that I was wearing, I gave it to Joe Scrow, our trainer. I grew up very poor, and old stuff. I wanted new stuff. Yeah. And so anyway, Joe kept it for a bunch of years and sold it to somebody, and then somebody else bought it. And I actually tried to buy it, and because I wanted to put it in the Hall of Fame. I gave the other shirt to the Hall of Fame, but I offered this guy, I think it was 30 grand for it, but he wouldn't take 30 grand. I said, well, I'm not paying any more than that. So anyway, in 2000, I think it was 12, it went up for auction. And it sold for $1.27 million.
Whoa. Ouch.
And one of my grandchildren said to me, Grandpa, if you would have kept that, I could have gone to Harvard.
That's funny.
1.27. Oh, man. Anyway.
Two of the big name players of the time didn't make it onto the Team Canada roster because Bobby Orr was coming off surgery, couldn't heal fast enough to make the team. Bobby Hull had just signed with the WHA. If Bobby Orr and Bobby Hull had both been on Team Canada from day one in Montreal, how much different would that series have looked?
I'm not sure Hull would have made a lot of difference. I really don't, because he would have had to find line mates that would go through him, working together. Bobby Orr would. I really believe if Bobby Orr would have been healthy, I think that he would have been able to be that big, big difference. But when Hull couldn't play, I was happy as a lark. I mean, he was a left winger. There's one guy that I don't have to beat. So I was really happy when he didn't get to play. And maybe if he'd have been there, obviously he would have played. But, the lines would have been different and everything like that. But I agree. Bobby Orr, on defense, best defenseman that ever played the game, I think, and he used to dominate all the time.
I don't know whether the Soviets would have been able to figure out what kind of a hockey player, whether he was an offensive or a defensive player, or whether he was both, because he was both.
Exactly.
Who suffered the biggest culture shock? Was it the Soviets coming to Canada and experiencing the capitalism that existed here, or was it Team Canada going to Moscow and experiencing communism in the Soviet Union at the time in 72?
Well, I said, after we got home, I said, if I owned a company, I would take all my employees over to Moscow for 4 or 5 days. And I'll tell you what, they would come back and they would never complain about working over here or anything we had. It was sad. And the communism doesn't work. When we landed in Moscow, we were driving into Moscow from the airport. Never saw one house. It was all apartments. And you looked up at the apartment building, and if the light was on, there was just a bulb hung from the ceiling.
Yep.
And, oh my gracious! And they had wonderful museums. And the day off, we would go to them, and we'd go to a museum, and there would be 500 people lined up, and the Red Army would go up to the front of the line with their guns, back the people up, and let us go in. And honest to God, we didn't even want to go in.
Yeah.
But no one said a word, I'll tell you, because if you did, you'd be in Siberia the next day.
Yeah.
And the stores, there was nothing in them. What a terrible, terrible way to live.
No kidding.
Unless you were a communist, and then of course. But they used to say, they used to bring hundreds and hundreds of athletes into Moscow every year, and all the gymnastics and everything. And as long as you kept improving, your parents, you had an apartment and you got a car and all that kind of stuff. But soon as you leveled out, you were gone. And that's why, and like Tikkun, the guys hated them. For 11 months, they were away from Monday till Friday from their families.
Yeah.
And you know, but you know, like they would practice, well, okay, 3 hours, that's all you do, pass the puck. You're getting professional guys today and if you can get them to practice passing for 10 minutes, you're lucky.
and stories about the hotel rooms being bugged and things going missing and the Soviet hockey team knowing about plays that you had designed in a hotel room with teammates sitting around. All that true?
No, game plan. I wish I knew the bloody game plan. And the stories that went on, about the chandelier falling and that's, but I'll tell you what, though, the Russians became capitalists and the food was awful. I mean, it really was.
Yeah.
The Canadian people recognized that we had steaks and beer over there. The beer is terrible too. They were buying it from the Russians in the hotel, were selling it to Canadians. But then when they could steal the steaks, that was okay. But when they took our beer, Ted, it was war. All over then.
That's as low as you can go.
You can't go lower than that. Stealing a person's beer.
Exactly. Paul Henderson, thank you so much for the memories. Thank you for taking the time to chatting with us today. You're a true gentleman and inspiration. I'm so glad to see that your health is doing well. God bless you, my friend, and all the best.
Thank you. God bless.
The Ted Wallacham Podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And Helenda's, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortino's, and Foodland locations. Helenda's, the way sausage should taste. The Ted Wallacham Podcast is produced by Joey Roselli. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. I'm Becky Coles. Submit your questions and comments to ted@twmedia.ca.